Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mike Sikuda. I'm Executive Director of the Financial Research Institute at the University of Missouri. FRI was established in 1988 to provide a neutral environment for stakeholders in regulated public utilities to come together to examine, understand, and debate current issues relating to public utility policy. In addition to our Hot Topic Hotline webinars, we host an annual Public Utility Symposium this year, that's on September 23rd, as well as executive and advanced training programs related to regulated utility industries, including our Regulated Utilities Leadership Institute, RULI, which will be held the first week of June this year. Registration is currently open for RULI, and we'll drop a link to that in the chat in case you may be interested in looking at it. We're glad that you joined us today for this conversation. Our topic is affordable utilities. What does affordability mean, and what does it look like? Aging infrastructure, increased extreme weather and wildfire events, load growth, and heightened public attention to rising utility costs require attention and response from regulators. Many regulators and utilities and consumer advocates are talking about affordability as the key issue in 2026. There is an increasing number of public utility commission dockets on affordability, pending bills or executive actions targeting rate making, and evolving expectations for spending discipline. What's driving current utility rates, and what does affordability mean in the utility context? What are reasonable customer expectations given the reinvestment needs of electric, gas, and water utilities? And how are utilities responding to those concerns? We are pleased to have a great group of experts join us today to share their perspectives on these affordability issues. Our panelists include Jennifer Bosco with the National Consumer Law Center, Peter Kappers from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, FRI board member Christine Telford from the Edison Electric Institute, and Chuck Ray from American Water. Our conversation today will be moderated by FRI board member Commissioner Staci Rubin from the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. We will have time for question and answers later in the program. If I invite you to submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your window. If you don't see the Q&A button, click the three little dots for more, and you should see that Q&A option. So you can type your questions in there. You'll also have the opportunity to upvote questions that are previously submitted, and we will try to respond to those questions by level of interest. So without further ado, our moderator, Commissioner Staci Rubin, was appointed to the Commissioner to the Department of Public Utilities in April 2023, marking her return to the agency. Prior to her appointment, she was the Vice President of Environmental Justice at the Conservation Law Foundation. Prior to the CLF, Rubin served as Senior Counsel and Hearing Officer at the Department of Public Utilities, where she specialized in distributed generation and public records matters. Preceding her role in state government, she was the Senior Attorney and Director of the Environmental Justice League Services Program at Alternatives for Community and Environment, Inc., where she provided legal representation to resident groups and nonprofit organizations and low-income communities and communities of color regarding energy efficiency, energy facility siting, and other community-led initiatives. As you can see, she has a long-standing interest in energy issues and community concerns. So Commissioner Rubin, thank you for leading our conversation today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sikuda, and hello, everyone. I promise you're in for a treat today. We've got an excellent conversation planned for you. Affordability is the top issue at every conference that I've been to in the past year and a half. It's certainly the sort of buzzword of the year in 2026. So in New England, winter gas rates have been volatile recently, and we're coming off a very cold winter. Thankfully, it's quite nice today, but we're seeing wildfires on the West Coast. Hurricanes and storms have contributed to cost increases. And as Dr. Sikuda noted, we've got aging infrastructure throughout the country in many of our utilities. We've got a number of Public Utility Commission dockets across the country that are addressing the affordability issues. We're certainly seeing a lot of attention to this at legislatures, and several governors are also taking action. So our goal today is to answer some really helpful questions and probably raise some really important questions. So I want to acknowledge that there have been some recent studies that we're going to talk about today. The Lawrence Berkeley National Lab published a study in the Electricity Journal that we'll hear about. There was a report that EEI was involved with titled The Grid Under Pressure, performed by the Charles River Associates. And National Consumer Law Center has produced an Energy Insecurity on the Rise issue brief. I'll note that we don't have a national or universal definition of affordability, and that is okay. So we're going to dive in. Let me give a little bit of a briefer introduction of our panelists. So Jennifer Bosco is the attorney and managing director at the National Consumer Law Center. Jen focuses on energy and utility issues that affect low-income consumers, and she's been leading NCLC's energy work. She has advocated for low-income consumers in several states, and Jen has worked on transportation electrification policy and competitive energy supply issues. And like me, Jen is based in Massachusetts. Next, we'll hear from Peter Kappers, who is a staff scientist and strategic advisor to the Energy Markets and Planning Department at Berkeley Lab. For the past 25 years, Pete has conducted research and provided technical assistance to territorial, state, federal, and international regulators and policymakers on electric utility, regulatory and business models, pricing and rate design, demand response, and energy efficiency market and policy issues. Pete is based in New York. We'll then hear from Christine Telford, the Vice President of State Engagement and Public Affairs for the Edison Electric Institute, or EEI. And that's the association that represents all of the investor-owned electric companies throughout the country. She leads a team responsible for outreach to state elected officials and regulators, engagement with external stakeholder groups, as well as public affairs and issue advocacy campaigns. Christine is based in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And last but not least, we have Chuck Ray, the Vice President of Regulated Pricing and Affordability at American Water. Chuck is a seasoned utility professional. With a strong background in utility pricing and affordability, Chuck previously held roles such as the Director of Energy Efficiency and Regulatory Analytics at Mid-American Energy, and has extensive experience in cost of service, rate design, and load research analysis. Chuck is based in Moline, Illinois. I'll say when this group met for our prep call, we had a really fun conversation. So I'm eager for the conversations. Again, I encourage you to put questions in the chat throughout the webinar. So we'll start off with each of our presenters giving kind of a 5-minute overview presentation and answer questions such as, what does affordability mean? And how bad is the current situation? So I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Jen Bosco to get us started.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubin. There are a few different ways that at the National Consumer Law Center that we have of looking at energy affordability. And if you're familiar with our organization, we're an advocacy organization for really focused on low-income consumers. So one of the ways that we look at affordability or unaffordability is energy burden. Many of you are probably quite familiar with that concept. So energy burden referring to the maximum percentage that a household should have to pay for their energy and utility bills. And the affordability programs that we work on with other consumer advocates, such as percentage of income payment programs or tiered discount rates for low-income people, those tend to be developed to achieve a certain kind of threshold or cap on energy burden. Ideally, our analysis is that for a 4% energy burden level for low-income people is at least within the realm of affordability. It still can be burdensome. And that's a percentage that's used, for instance, in the New Jersey percentage of income payment program. It's used, actually was announced that it'll be part of the new Massachusetts tiered discount rate program for the very lowest income consumers. Other states, some use a higher figure up to around 6%. We tend to think that that was reasonable when it was first developed 20 years ago, but as housing prices and other prices have gone up for consumers, low-income consumers really struggle at that 6% level. So that's one way we look at energy affordability. Another thing that we look at is energy insecurity, and that is kind of a self-reported measure, and the source of data that we look to for that is the EIA Residential Energy Consumption Survey, or REX survey. And the issue brief that Commissioner Rubin referred to is something that my colleague John Howitt at NCLC compiled recently, because EIA last month released data from its 2024 REX survey. And as we would expect to see, the self-reported energy insecurity among U.S. households has gone up since the time of the last REX survey in 2020. At that time, it was 27%. Now, energy insecurity is reported to be at 33%. Nearly a quarter of the households reporting said that they have reduced food or foregone medicine or other necessities to pay their energy bills. And the data shows that energy insecurity continues to disproportionately impact households of color, particularly Native American and Black households reported energy insecurity nearly twice as high as the national average. And while every region in the US did see an increase in energy insecurity, the highest increases reported were found in the South. So those are two of the ways. And then I guess stepping back more broadly, I think affordable energy for me would be defined as ending, an end of the racial disparities that we see in disconnections and arrearages around the country whenever we've analyzed data from, different utility service territories. We have unfortunately always found that there is a racial disparity and higher rates of disconnection for people of color. Also, ideally to someday see an end of disconnections based on inability to pay. Affordability programs really do help low-income people at least have a shot at paying their bills. And so to see an end of disconnections and for people who just are not able to pay. Thank you. I hope I didn't go past the 5 minutes by too much.
You did an excellent job. Thank you, Jen. Next up, we have Pete Cappers, and Pete's going to share some slides with us. Looks great. And Pete, I think you're muted. If you can just unmute, that would be great.
I've worked out of my house for 19 years and I still forget to take the darn thing off mute. Thank you, Commissioner Rubin. Really appreciate you and Dr. Sakuda inviting me to come speak today. In addition to the Electricity Journal article that Commissioner Rubin talked about, we actually just released some research and update to that work that came out last week. And that's really what I want to talk about. Since I work for a lab and I'm incapable of actually presenting on information without slides, I figured I would throw some together. It's about 13 of them. Pictures give 1,000 words, or save me a lot from speaking. So hopefully convey a lot of information in a short amount of time. So with that, let's get going. So this study that we did with the Brattle Group was really intended to add considerably more nuance to the current discussions about the national electricity affordability crisis, and really some of the scapegoating that often occurs when identifying causes of that crisis. So first and foremost, we found that national average all-in retail rates, what we call electricity prices, have definitely risen over the past several years, including in 2025. But they have generally tracked with inflation, and if not, grown slower than inflation over that period of time. However, those national trends really do mask a diverse experience at the state level. The graphic on the left shows price changes between 2019 and 2025, where we see 29 states did experience price increases, with the largest rises happening in California, the Northeast region, as well as some states in the Mid-Atlantic. If we instead focus on just last year, the graphic on the right shows that 43 states saw electricity prices rise, with the largest impacts felt again in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and the Great Lakes region. Now, rising electricity prices can really undermine households' economic standing, as we just heard. However, at a national level, we saw electricity costs in 2024 as a fraction of personal expenditures, as well as a fraction of personal income, more or less reach their lowest levels since 2010. Yet these aggregate national trends in electricity prices do belie a much more nuanced story of affordability. Again, as we just heard, electricity burden continues to be above 5% for our lowest earning households, which can be extremely challenging and problematic. Now, our research found the main cause of electricity price increases over these last 5-10 years has really been transmission and especially distribution system expenditures. These have been undertaken for a variety of reasons, including in response to the growing threat and impact of storms and wildfires. How such costs are recovered makes a huge difference in their price impact. For example, Duke Energy Florida recovers all of its storm-related costs through a one-year rate rider, which caused prices to rise by over 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, juxtapose that with Duke Energy Carolina that extended its recovery period to 20 years, and that resulted in a modest 0.2 cent impact. Now, not only has the level of investments in the T&D system risen of late, but the cost of that equipment has grown well above the pace of inflation. For example, wire and cable prices have risen over 150%, while even things like wood pole prices have grown by 50% since 2019. Our research also found that state policies like renewable portfolio standards and net energy metering that sought to encourage deployment in excess of what the competitive market would deliver have increased prices, although the magnitude of those impacts differ considerably by state. However, roughly 75% of the deployment of wind and solar in the US has actually been market-driven. Our assessment is that this market-based deployment really has not increased retail electricity prices. Now, natural gas has become the dominant fuel for electricity generation across the country. And as a result, wholesale electricity prices closely track natural gas prices. And in 2024, we saw almost the lowest inflation-adjusted natural gas price from the last 15 years. And that resulted in some of the lowest wholesale electricity prices over that same time period. But in 2025, the national average price of natural gas increased 36% from that all-time low. And that pushed generation costs and wholesale electricity prices higher. However, the effect at a regional level varied quite considerably based on how dependent their generation fleet was on this fuel type. Wholesale price increases eventually find their way into retail electricity prices. Our analysis suggests increased fuel and wholesale power costs were a key driver in 2025. When looking at year-over-year increases in retail rates, that was caused in about 21 states. Lastly, electric utilities are a network industry where a large share of costs are tied up in long-lived capital assets. The more electricity a utility sales that can utilize that existing network, well, the more this will lower prices as these sunk costs are spread over a larger sales base and potentially avoids new investment. Our analysis shows that state-level load growth has driven reductions in all sector average prices and had minimal, if any, adverse impacts on residential prices looking backwards. However, there is increasing evidence to suggest this trend may be reversing itself, where there are very real risks of residential price increases in some states on the horizon. All right, I don't know if I quite got through it in 5 minutes, but hopefully that plants a bunch of seeds for some of the conversations to come. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Pete. Thanks for the research and for sharing it. And I believed in you, and you absolutely did it in 5 minutes. So congratulations. That's a lot of information in a short period of time. We're going to next move to Christine Telford.
Yes,
tell us what's happening from EEI.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Rubin. Thank you, Dr. Sakuda, for having EEI join this important conversation. As you can imagine, for EEI members, affordability and the value we're delivering to customers is of utmost importance. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation today. As was mentioned at the beginning, there are several studies, a lot of research going on out there on this topic. Obviously, the LBNL recent update to their research is very helpful, I think, as we discuss these challenges. I do want to dig a little bit more into the Charles River Associates study that was mentioned earlier, that was commissioned by EEI, and just kind of highlight some of the key findings. And if you have time to take a look at that study, I really encourage you to do so. I don't have slides, unfortunately, so I won't be as exciting as Pete, but I'll do my best. In terms of kind of the key takeaways from the CRA study, we found that rate increases are concentrated in very specific regions and states across the country. And I think Pete got a little bit into that in terms of kind of the very local concentrations and reasons, I think, for what we're seeing in terms of rate increases, right? And so with those regional and state-specific challenges, he mentioned some of them, right? Like wildfire costs in California and out west, which is truly an existential crisis, we believe, for our members out west. And then looking at the Northeast, wholesale electricity market increases, one of the big drivers for the rate increases and bill increases that we're seeing in the Northeast. The second point I'll make is most of the country has actually seen stable rates, according to the research that we worked with with CRA on, and they've been in line with inflation. Third is that data centers have generally not caused retail rate increases, with the exception of PJM, and that was found in the data as well. And lastly, just making the point that proactive large load tariffs and agreements are increasingly being implemented to prevent these cost shifts. So those are just some key takeaways from the research we did with CRA, and hopefully you guys will get a chance to take a look at that. I'll also mention EEI is very encouraged by the recent data update to the LBNL study. So I'm glad Pete went before me because I can touch on a little bit of that. Based on their recent update, household electricity costs accounted for just 1.25% of total household spending in 2025, which is near an all-time low. So we found that very encouraging. Secondly, from their updated data, adjusting for inflation, real average retail electricity prices were up 3% from 2019, but down 6% from 2010. So I think another encouraging point there. Kind of the third area I'll touch on is really what EEI members are doing as we're talking about delivering value to our customers, right? And I think our members have done an excellent job of taking this challenge head on. They're proactively making payment plan arrangements with customers. We're seeing that across the sector. Our members are proactively, again, connecting customers with appropriate state and federal resources to help pay their energy bills. There are also many companies are doing direct bill assistance contributions to help offset some of the challenges we're seeing in increasing bills, and also issuing temporary disconnect moratoriums. Companies are also partnering with local nonprofit organizations to distribute financial assistance to those in the community who need it most. So national organizations like Salvation Army, United Way, really partnering with those local chapters in the community to make sure that the assistance goes to the right customers and making sure that those customers are getting the help that they need. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, EEI continues to be a leading advocate for full federal funding of LIHEAP. We love LIHEAP, and we work with our members to make sure that we raise awareness both at the state and federal levels of the importance of fully funding LIHEAP. And our members also contribute millions of dollars to energy assistance programs for vulnerable customers. So I believe I made it in my 5 minutes, but I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. We also will be putting links to all these studies in the chat. So just give us a minute. We'll get that done. So let's turn to the water context. Chuck, tell us what's happening there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Dr. Mike. Water. Well, different set of challenges than electric and gas. Different toolbox a little bit to address those challenges, but it's the same customer expectations, right? We operate in 12 states. We might have the largest regulatory reach of any utility in the country. I don't know that anybody operates in 12 different states, which means 12 different ways of thinking about affordability, 12 different sets of solutions potentially. And so we're sort of exposed to a really wide variety of views on the issue. Water rates are going up, just like electric rates, just like gas rates. Some of it is due to requirements that the federal government puts on water around water quality. Some of it is due to just very aging infrastructure. There's a water treatment plant right across the river from where I live in Davenport, Iowa, where pieces of that plant are more than 100 years old. It's almost as old as the city itself. And so we see situations like that, where we've got infrastructure challenges, we've got challenges, at least in funding related to requirements. We also see another issue for water that we see is that unlike electric and gas utilities, there are lots and lots and lots of water companies across the country, thousands and thousands. Most of them are very small, some of them not in very good shape at all. And the communities that these systems are in simply can't keep up with funding and doing the things that they need to do to make sure that they've got high quality water and wastewater service. And so there are issues in the water industry that American Water works on related to that. And so that's another issue in what rates are doing. There's just a lot of infrastructure out there that needs to be replaced, that needs to be worked on, that needs to be better funded. It all means that rates are going to go up, but we do have a different set of tools to deal with it, and ways to talk about it with customers. So I'm looking forward very much to discussing all of that and have a chance to talk about how all of this works for water. Some of what we think about for affordability is what everybody thinks about, no matter what type of utility service you provide. Some of it is very particular to water. Very much looking forward to the rest of the afternoon here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chuck. Everybody did a fabulous job keeping to the time and listening to instructions, so thank you. I'll note that we have close to 200 participants here, which is, I think, the largest audience that we've ever had for a live Hot Topic Hotline webinar for the Financial Research Institute. So I think that's one, the tenure of and expertise of the panelists, but also just noting how important this topic is. So let's get into some discussion here. How are utilities communicating with their customers and their shareholders about affordability? And then how are customers and shareholders responding? And I'd love to hear from Christine and Chuck in particular on this issue. I know we in Massachusetts, we as the regulator are hearing from lots of customers all the time. So eager to hear from your perspective. What are you hearing and what's the response?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off and let Chuck give his thoughts too. I'll say when I speak with the communicators at our member companies, I feel like bill inserts aren't necessarily a thing of the past, but it's certainly not the only tool in the toolbox anymore, right? Companies are getting increasingly creative, relying more on social media, relying on other channels to communicate information, again, about, customer support programs, changes to your bills. If you had told me 9 years ago when I joined EEI that one of our members would be creating a TikTok account, I wouldn't have believed you, but TikTok is increasingly a channel that the industry is using. So again, getting innovative, getting creative, using all these new channels that I think previously would not have been in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, we see, there are a lot of different audiences that we talk to. We certainly talk to regulators and shareholders or stakeholders within the context of a rate case setting. We do a lot of analytics on affordability of our water and wastewater service, and we're very proud of that. I personally think that it's hard to solve a problem that you can't measure. And so we make a big effort at that. We talk to public finance folks, those kind of folks to talk about where we're talking about affordability. Certainly, there are opportunities to educate customers. One of the challenges with water service is that a lot of the stuff is underground. and it's hard for customers to see what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And so there's a big education piece to that. Getting customers to sign up for programs, that's a challenge. I can tell you in some places, particularly in Pennsylvania, we go door to door. We knock on the doors in communities where we think there are customers that could take advantage of this that are not, get right up with them and talk about what we're doing and all of that. So it's a challenge, but we're looking for and always trying to find sort of innovative ways to deal with it.
That's great. It's really interesting to hear about door-to-door and TikTok accounts. That's not something I hear regularly. Just wanted to see if you had anything specific to shareholder communication or their responses that either of you wanted to say.
It's been generally positive. It depends on the audience. It also depends on the state and the area where we're talking about. There are very different attitudes in different parts of the country on affordability. Some places like New Jersey, like Illinois, like Pennsylvania, are very much into what can we do to help customers. There are other places where we operate in that aren't, I don't want to say they're not concerned about affordability, but they're not in the same boat in terms of having, say, discount programs where we're offering lower rates for some customers and those costs go somewhere else. So it's mixed, I would say, from our perspective.
Great, thank you. All right, so we've heard a lot about different studies, so that's great. What information do we not have that we think we need to further assess affordability and inform potential solutions? So let's start with you, Pete, and then move to Chuck to see if you have different ideas about data needs.
Sure. I think this is actually one idea going hand in hand with some of the communication issue is this notion of functionally unbundled cost rates, right? Not every utility functionally unbundles their rates. It really helps with transparency, but it also helps understand like where are those rates changing over time? What is driving rate increases? And one of the things that's really interesting is FERC Form 1 has an enormous amount of information associated, public information that is available, required by, large IOUs to file, but it's not always functionalized in the way that would lend itself to producing retail rate components. We attempted to do that. It was a pretty Herculean effort on the part of my colleague Galen Barbos, making a number of assumptions about allocation and to ultimately arrive at a class-specific rate component. But to me, that's a really critical issue here is how do you identify the problem? Getting a little bit back to Chuck's point of, once you can identify a problem, then you begin to have an opportunity to understand the solutions associated with it. So I think data, some of these types of more transparent data opportunities at more granular levels would just be super helpful. And I think on the second part, in terms of identifying then potential solutions, grid utilization, system utilization seems like one particular opportunity that we are just beginning to look at, right? Virginia just passed a law looking to potentially implement. A number of other states are beginning to look at this type of issue. But how do we measure system utilization, right? We don't have a really good sense of how to incentivize increased system utilization. We've never really asked a utility to do this. So like, what's going to be effective? We don't know the degree to which it would even be successful in terms of if we're asking customers to do things, right? We've had a very limited experience with retail electricity pricing. Default time of use is really pretty rare, despite AMI benefits and business cases really advocating or citing that as a potential benefit. So if we're going to rely on customers to, change their consumption patterns to increase utilization, like what are reasonable expectations there? How likely is it that they will do the things that we want them to do? And therefore, how large of an impact is that really going to have? And so some of this ultimately is also around expectation setting to me. So, identifying the solutions, but then setting realistic expectations of how those changes might meaningfully affect rates instead of feeling like, a blanket statement of, oh, well, we're going to make sure that large loads don't, we're going to see utility rates go down by 6%, despite large loads coming in. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? How is that going to be made manifest? So a bunch of these more granular, specific, elements, I think, would really help inform the affordability discussion.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, Chuck, anything to add?
Yeah, and that's an issue. What Pete was just talking about. That's one of the issues that we have in the water industry. A lot of granular data is good to have to let you think about affordability. We don't have nearly the kind of information on how our customers use water that electric utilities and to some extent gas utilities have. So while there are certainly opportunities to do things with rate design, specifically targeted to folks that we think are probably lower income customers, having the data available and then being able to do something with it in rate design is a bigger challenge for us. So there are opportunities there. I mean, AMI has been around for electric utilities for quite a while now. Load research has gone back years and years and years. AMI data for water companies is just kind of coming into its own.
So we have a lot of work to do, is the point. Got it. All right. So I want to just dive a little bit deeper on water issues. So unlike other utilities, water is a product that we ingest. So that's obviously a non-negotiable mandate for absolute safety. Do you think that water utilities are being unfairly lumped into this kind of rising costs narrative while quietly maintaining reasonable bills? So I wonder if Chuck and Jen could comment on this question.
No and yes. How about that? I mean, yes, there are issues that we deal with, forever chemicals, things like that, that just have to be dealt with. There's no getting around it. There's infrastructure that is aging and falling apart in some places. That needs to be dealt with, no question about it. And so there are cost pressures on water utilities, I think, that are sort of unavoidable. But as I mentioned when we first started out, at the same time, I mean, customer expectations aren't going to change. I've never met anybody that said, yeah, my bill went way up, but I get it. I understand why and all of these things, and it's okay. That's not what they say. So, yes, I think it's I don't want to say unfair. There are certainly different challenges that make it more difficult for water utilities to kind of control costs. But I mean, like I said, customer expectations don't change. And so, yeah, that means that we have to talk about and make sure that our service is affordable just like everybody else does.
And I think, everyone has at some point mentioned like more data and how it would be helpful. And we don't really have a great source nationally on water affordability data. Not even to the same extent as the REC survey that I was describing earlier. So, and it's tough because of, there are so many municipal water providers and then, and then the regulated water providers. But that's it, an area where we just don't have a lot of data. What we hear as consumer advocates is that water affordability is a challenge for low-income customers and has been for a long time. And that's, something that's unfortunately just been an enduring challenge. Some jurisdictions have introduced discount programs and percentage of income payment programs for water. A couple of the recent examples are DeKalb County in Georgia, actually, and Philadelphia have water PIP programs. And, we definitely could use more around the country. And I'd earlier put in the Q&A in response to a question, NCLC and NRDC collaborated a while ago on a water affordability toolkit. I can put it in the chat as well, but that has kind of some policy recommendations for water affordability.
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages, if I can just add on, one of the advantages that we have is that we have enough scope and we have enough scale and we understand our rates to to where we can estimate, bill to income ratios for, or water burdens, however you want to call it, bill to income ratios, in different communities where we serve and different, states. And we have a pretty detailed picture, both at the state level and all the way down to the community level, how many customers we think we have water service at less than 2% of household income or 1% of household income. And we talk about that a lot with stakeholders, especially in kind of rate case proceedings. So we've done a lot of work on that. But like I said, an advantage that we have is that we have a lot of that kind of data. To do a national study or even a statewide study, when, as Jennifer was talking about, when you've got all of these different utilities out there with different rate structures, some of which you may not have any idea what their rate structures even are, at a policy level, that's a big chore. It's tough enough for us the way it is, and we have a lot of data. For places that don't have a lot of data, it's just that much worse.
Yeah, thanks for that. So really, we've identified problems. We've identified some reasons for why we're seeing the trends that we're seeing across electric, some gas, and water utilities. Jen, tell us, what are the top 2 consumer advocate recommendations that will allow us to make progress in the short term?
Well, even before the current concerns about affordability, low-income families have been struggling with unaffordable bills and disconnections from service. And I think, one of the big priorities for low-income consumer advocates is to create and expand bill affordability programs to help keep low-income people connected to service and to keep bills at a reasonable level to the extent possible. And that also includes looking at expenses such as deposits or late fees to make sure, are these actually reasonable or are these excessive, considering what the costs are to the utility companies. And second, we need to make sure that families can be safe in their homes by having protections from disconnection when there are emergency or urgent situations going on, when there is dangerous weather, or when customers are seriously ill and unable to pay their bills. It's kind of in no one's service to be disconnecting people who in those situations are just simply not able to pay. And, I think the hope too is that by having more affordable bills and kind of more stability, it will help decrease the demand on utility company resources as well by not having customers churning on and off of service and not having to dedicate resources to disconnecting and reconnecting customers.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask a question that's pretty selfish of me. I am a regulator. I see a number of other commissioners and commission staff who are on the webinar with us today. How should regulators balance the needs to maintain reliability and service quality with consumer needs to have predictable bills that they can actually pay? Any thoughts? Maybe we'll start. I'm going to put Christine on the spot to get us started, but I'd like all of you to answer this question.
That's a tough question. And I think that's why regulators and their staff have the hardest jobs, I think. So, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of things within the rate making process that lead to increased costs for customers, right? Like cost of capital is a whole area that I think a lot of folks don't have a lot of background in or understand about. So, really understanding that there are things that can increase cost of capital and ultimately lead to increased costs for customers. So that's something that I would think about and keep in mind. But again, I think regulators have the hardest job, right? And so I think you all are uniquely positioned to really be the ones to help facilitate these ongoing conversations to maintain that balance. And I think one of the unique natures of what all of us do here is that all stakeholders are part of the process, right? And so I think that holds EEI members accountable and make sure that we're really looking carefully at all aspects and all stakeholder groups when we're going through the rate making process.
Thank you. How about you, Pete?
Oh boy, yeah, no, I'm with Christine. I mean, you guys have a incredible job here. Incredibly difficult job. This is a big crisis. Whether it's perceived or real, again, going back, I think it depends on sort of your lens, your perspective, et cetera. But, I guess if we're really getting down to brass tacks, there's this idea of we'll never let a good crisis go to waste. And so you, in the regulatory arena, I think have an opportunity to really think outside the box, right? A perfect example of that is a number of states looking at system utilization. Never really been discussed much before in the regulatory arena. It's kind of been off to the side, but now it's being taken really seriously of like, hey, why don't, yes, it's a network industry. Yes, it is designed for maximum utilization, reliability at its sort of worst case scenario. But that doesn't mean we can't be thinking about how to better utilize, more efficiently use existing resources we have and creating incentive structures such that utilities are incentivized to pursue things like that over, let's say, increasing capital. I think another thing to just kind of think about is pursuing some things that have long been considered the third rail. Christine mentioned return on equity and cost of capital. You look at, the electric industry, their price to book ratios are some of the highest of comparable industries, which suggests they're earning considerably more than their book values. There's been a lot of studies that have been done, or several studies have been done recently that look at the level of sort of an ROE premium above the cost of equity. And so I think, again, this could be an opportunity to revisit some of those returns that have been authorized. You've seen this at FERC most recently. And so states potentially have an opportunity, in the current, moment to really rethink some of those capital setting exercises, the approaches in which you go to do it, and address some of these issues around returns vis-a-vis performance and sort of potentially thinking about tying those two together. And maybe the last one I would say is just the notion of a bully pulpit. Like, again, you've seen this at the administration level. I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but like it does create an opportunity, I think, for you all in the regulatory arena to sort of use that bully pulpit in ways you might not have thought about using it previously. So I don't know, three different things to think about.
Yeah, very helpful. And you're just referencing a recent FERC decision regarding a return on equity issue in New England with ISO New England.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks for that. Jen.
I will agree that this question also gave me a little new perspective or, more perspective on how hard the regulator's job is. Because even answering this question, I think was a challenge. And I guess it made me think about the challenge of the investments that we need to make in gas transition, electrification, ongoing upgrades and repairs that are inevitably going to fall on customer bills, and nobody's going to thank the regulators for this, but it's just inevitable, and it's going to be more expensive down the road if we don't take care of these things now. I think one of the concerns I have is, avoiding to continuing to sink costs into the gas system, and the need to really aggressively pursue that transition. And kind of alongside of all this is, why one of the reasons why we advocate for the programs to help shield low-income customers from price spikes and from like greater affordability problems, because the burden of making these investments and these changes shouldn't fall on the people who are least able to pay. So it's one of the reasons we, advocate so strongly for affordability programs.
Thank you. Chuck.
I mean, one of the things that we think regulators can do to help is kind of broaden the conversation, just even beyond just the conversation with us and regulators. I mean, one of the things that we don't have in the water industry anymore, anyway, is something like LIHEAP, where we've got an additional funding source that can help customers with their bills. Our customers are taxpayers, just like electric and gas utility customers are. And one of the things that we would like to see maybe is regulators help with broadening the conversation to people that can help develop more federal programs where we can have funding coming in from the outside. I think that's something that can be a very positive thing for the water industry going forward too.
That's great. Thank you. So we're getting close to the end of time, and I've got many more questions. Plus, we have some in the chat. So I want to keep going, but maybe try to answer briefly for some of these next ones. So how do efforts to decarbonize and achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and as well as incorporate demand response and increase grid utilization, do those efforts contribute to or hinder affordability efforts? And Jen, I'd love you to start us off.
Well, I guess kind of maybe it's a little bit of taking off from that, but the affordability of electricity is so crucial to being able to decarbonize, being able to electrify home heating, so for transportation and building electrification. Because if we are expecting customers to make these changes, they have to know that they're going to be able to pay their electric bills, that their electric service will be there. So really, the affordable electricity, especially for low and moderate income families, is really a precondition for any of this. And if we fail to do this, it's going to undermine decarbonization efforts, unfortunately.
Thanks. Pete.
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, our research showed that the majority of wind and solar development was driven by market forces, not public policy. And so, yes, there are places, as I mentioned, where public policy has reduced affordability in this space, but the majority of the deployment has really been market driven. I think the other thing is you mentioned demand response. And to me, demand response, time-based rates are all kind of two sides of the same coin. This is something we as an industry have just not harnessed nearly well enough. Again, there's very good reasons why, incentive misalignment, all of those types of things. And I think this is a good opportunity to really think about how rates and programs, just DR programs, could really help from an affordability standpoint, whether it's promoting system utilization, it's avoiding costs, et cetera. But it is definitely an underutilized tool in the toolbox that I think should really be focused on to promote and improve affordability across the board.
Thank you. Christine.
Yeah, I think I'll start with, state decarbonization policies vary, right, state by state. And I know that that's one piece of what regulators and policymakers are looking at every day as our reliability and affordability. But to echo Pete a little bit, I'm really excited about kind of the progress we're seeing in the states on demand response and improved grid utilization. He mentioned the Virginia bill, which is exciting. And I'll mention, we're probably one of the only industries that dedicates time and resources to helping our customers use less of our product. But some specific examples. Just this week, the Minnesota Commission approved a VPP program for one of our members. We're seeing more of our members kind of dip their toe into VPPs and pilots, so that's really exciting. A few weeks ago, Google announced that they've signed 1 gigawatt of data center demand response in partnership with several EEI member companies. These are areas that we're excited about, and I think will contribute hopefully to both decarbonization and affordability efforts.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's talk about short-term versus long-term. How do we balance the need to reduce bills in the short term, particularly with the data, Pete, that you showed us earlier, with also the need to address long-term affordability, reliability, and safety? And Chuck, can you get us started on this?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's a question that we face all the time. It comes down to, well, one of the things that helps, I think, is to think about where you are at the moment in terms of affordability. We get a lot of talking about an issue without what we believe anyway is sort of fully understanding where we are. We do a lot of work to talk about bill to income ratios at a higher level too. Regulators in West Virginia, where that number is probably not very favorable, have a very different view of the short term versus long term connotations than a state where we've got a lower rates and a better off community that we're serving. There's not a good answer. I think that we have to keep talking about the investments that we're making and why we're making the investments that we're making, and work on, in the water industry anyway, some rate design solutions, programmatic solutions that can be targeted at the customers that we think need it most, economically anyway.
Thank you. Let's go to Jen, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Saikuda to get us into some questions from the chat.
I think that, it is a challenge. And, of course, for low-income customers, your immediate bill is the biggest concern. But I think we really need to avoid doing things that are going to end up being maybe short-sighted and cost more in the long run. And the example I'm thinking of is that there's been discussion in some states about cutting back on ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs. And energy efficiency programs, when they're run well, they save customers money. They've been saving customers money for years. And I think that would be short-sighted to cut back on those programs for like the kind of an illusory short-term bill decrease.
Commissioner Rubin, can I just add one additional comment here, which
Yes,
I think
please.
sort of plays off of Chuck's point about investments. Utilities have undertaken lots of investments over the last 10 years, oftentimes with benefit cost assessments that come with them. So I view this as go back, revisit those benefit cost assessments. Are there any benefits in those assessments that have not been realized? And if not, talk to the utility. What can we do to get those benefits realized? You've already got the investment. You already said that benefit was potentially going to be there. How, what's keeping you from doing it? Is it something on our end as a regulator? We need to remove a burden, whatever. AMI is a perfect example of this, where I think a lot of the benefits that ultimately put those things over the top were time-based rates, demand response. And yet, as we've kind of talked about, we're now beginning to think about opportunities to leverage those, but we haven't for the last 5 or 10 years. So is that, again, a good opportunity to take a benefit that was previously identified in an investment plan, but yet maybe has been under-realized? And so an opportunity there to really quickly at least begin to address some of these affordability issues by finding these existing investments and opportunities to realize those benefits.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Dr. Saikuda, why don't you pick a question perhaps from the chat that's been upvoted a couple of times?
So I think one that stands out, and this goes back to some of the data issues that we talked about earlier, is how do we reconcile that the data shows increased rates tracking with inflation, and at the same time, many households seem to experience much more extreme high energy burdens. Do you think the data is masking those impacts at a more granular level, and does that make affordability harder to advocate for? The person who posted comment added there are areas in their community where the average energy burden is as high as 35%. So, we see these large statistics, some of the data that Pete showed, but as we get more granular, we see very different pictures. So how do we deal with that, especially in terms of advocating for where the real needs are? Anybody?
Chuck, you
Yeah.
look ready to go.
No, it's a two-pronged issue for us. You can think about affordability at a high level, but like you said, Mike, it doesn't really get to what's going on kind of deep down at the community level. So we try to talk about both of these things at the same time. I don't think you can just pick one way or the other. We talk a lot about, our average bills and our median household income across our service territory. And that tries to communicate where we are kind of at a system level, which sort of relates to how you think about revenue requirements and return on equity and, all of those kinds of things. But also at a community level, which is kind of where the question here is. We also spend a lot of time thinking about, in different communities that we serve, what percentage of customers do we think are having issues with water? So for us, it's really you can't, I don't think of it as thinking about it one way or the other way. I think you have to think about it both ways, sort of at the same time. And it's kind of what we try to do when we communicate, especially in the context of rate proceedings. It's not an either or thing. You got to find a way to talk about both of these things at the same time, I think.
Commissioner Rubin, can I just add as well? I think, this is one of the reasons why there's been a big push in a lot of states to have more stakeholder voices, more consumer voices as part of utility commission proceedings, because the data doesn't always tell the whole story. And, things might look different from one utility service territory to the next, even within one state. So, the measures that have been adopted in some places to increase funding to allow, smaller nonprofits to intervene in cases, or to, translate materials, or to schedule hearings at times when, working people can attend, to put notices in plain English so that you don't have to speak utility speak to understand what they mean. I think all those are helpful to illustrate how the affordability issues are impacting people.
Thanks. Definitely the items that we are working on in Massachusetts, and I know a lot of other states are trying to do that as well. So somehow that hour has flown by. Thank you all so much for your wisdom and for this great conversation. I wish we had much more time together. I'll just wrap up by saying there are just so many Public Utility Commission proceedings that are addressing affordability right now. So I encourage everybody to be active at their local PUC. There's lots happening at legislatures. So talk to your elected officials and get things moving. And I'll just note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the FRI YouTube channel. So if there's something you missed, we'll make sure that you can go back and see that. Dr. Saikuda, I'll pass it to you to do a final wrap up. Thanks so much, everyone.
I just want to thank all of our panelists and Commissioner Rubin for sharing your time today and sharing your perspectives and expertise. I know there were several questions that we weren't able to get to from the Q&A, but I think the conversation you all had hit on several of those indirectly, at least. So again, thank you all for your time. For those of you who joined us today, thank you for taking time to join us. As Commissioner Rubin said, our YouTube channel is at FRI-MIZ, Z-O-U, because we're good old Mizzou. So you can find this recording there sometime early next week. And we look forward to seeing you all again at one of our future programs. Thank you so much.